Hi, I'm here today to talk about the NFL free agency issue. This is a concise legal history of the NFL free agency issue. First of all, what is free agency? Free agency in the NFL is the right to freely market your service to the highest bidder in the NFL without uh, any restrictions on the player. Right now, they have a contract that has expired, but there's still player restrictions that suggest that they cannot leave and move to another team even though their contract has expired and they're free to negotiate. That's called a player restriction. Free agency is the opposite of a player restriction. Number two, what is the antitrust? If to understand the legal history of free agency, you have to know what antitrust is. And I'm just going to give you a brief overview of antitrust. Antitrust is the trust is an agreement to curtail competition. So antitrust means that you cannot have an agreement that curtails competition. That's what antitrust is. That comes up a lot in the NFL's case. For example, the NFL has an agreement to curtail competition of the owners of the teams negotiating for players. That's found to be a violation of the federal laws, and that has been found to be a violation of the federal laws. However, if there's a labor relations agreement in place with the union and management, in this case the NFLPA and the NFL, then that can trump antitrust law and the labor law can prevail and a legal contract can be found to be legal. That's called the non-statutory labor exemption, and that's the labor law you need to know as it relates to the NFL case, and that's found in the Powell decision that I'll be going over in a little bit. What is free agency today? That I'll go over at the end of this webinar. So let's get started. First of all, let's start with the phenomenal Radovich decision. That's a Supreme Court decision that started in 1957, that took place in 1957. That decision gave players in the NFL the right to sue management, the NFL, in the federal court system. It's called the Radovich decision. Prior to this, in baseball, with the Toulson decision and the federal baseball case, they could not sue management in court system. Management in MLB is to this day still exempt. That was challenged again in the 1980s with the Kuhn decision, and the Supreme Court has still found baseball to be an exceptional case and exempt from the antitrust laws. So it is the players of baseball are not able to sue management. But in the NFL, under the Radovich decision in the Supreme Court in 1957, they are able to sue the NFL. The players are able to sue the NFL for antitrust violations in the federal court system. That's the phenomenal Radovich decision. The Mackey decision. In 1978, the Mackey case came out. That decision was a Court of Appeals case that ruled in favor of the players and found it to be a violation of federal law to have player restrictions on players in the NFL. That was called the Mackey case in 1978. It's important because the Court of Appeals found for the players and said player restrictions was illegal under antitrust laws. That's the Mackey case. It was denied certiorari in the Supreme Court. That means the Supreme Court refused to overturn or look at the decision. That case was the Mackey decision, and that paved the way for free agency with the players. And you'd say that case is over then. We won the case, and the players are free now to market the service. That's what you'd think. But what happened is in the Reynolds case, it was a class action after the Mackey decision. It settled the Mackey case, and they gave money to the players, and in exchange for money, the players of the union gave language that restricted free agency in the collective bargaining agreement. That was called the Reynolds decision. That followed Mackey, and that was the settlement to the Mackey case. It was a class action case with 400 players, future, former, and past players. So then we come to the Powell case. That was a 1991 decision, started in 1988 with a strike, a 57-day strike by the union that was unsuccessful in reaching resolve. They reached impasse in their labor negotiations, and it was all over the free agency issue. The players wanted to be free to market their service to the highest bidder. The NFL wanted to lock them down because they said competitive balance and the continuity of the teams was very important to them, and they needed the restrictions to keep the competitive balance in the team and the leagues so they could remain viable in the industry of entertainment. That was what brought about the Powell case. In the Powell case, the players sued via the union, NFL, after impasse, demanding the Mackey result of the free agency restrictions being found unconstitutional and, well, they be found against the law and antitrust laws in the federal court system. That was called the Powell case. But in the Powell case, the players lost that case, and they lost it because there's a collective bargaining agreement in place now that they signed with management, that they had equal say on the matter and they had the power to bargain, and they settled the case and got money back for it. So the court system now found what's called the non-statutory labor relations exemption to the antitrust provisions and ruled in favor of the NFL that since there was a collective bargaining agreement in place, they were at impasse, but it was still a part of labor negotiations, impasse itself a part of labor negotiations, that the NFLPA had to go back to the table and negotiate and resolve, and that was their only mechanism. They couldn't go to antitrust courts anymore. That was called the 1991 Powell decision. That was big because it ruled in favor of the NFL. So what happened in 1991 is the players decertified themselves from the NFLPA. That means that they voted down the NFLPA as their players' rep and they went solo. In going solo, they filed what's called the McNeil case. That was resolved in 1992. That was resolved by a jury verdict. In the McNeil decision in 1992, they found it was legal for them to desert themselves, and they now had standing to file an antitrust case in the court system again. In that case, it was decided by jury. They found on behalf of the players, and they found that there were damages that had incurred on behalf of the players because of the violations of antitrust laws in the NFL. So the NFL was liable to the players for damages, and that's trebled because it's antitrust law. Everything gets trebled. And they had to pay back the players for damages. That was called the McNeil decision. And in that case, the jury found that it was reasonable for the NFL to take into account competitive balance, but they found it was unreasonable to restrict the players' movement to achieve competitive balance, that there was a less restrictive way that they could get that done without restricting the rights of the players. So the jury found on behalf of the players, like the Mackey case, McNeil found for the players, and they were given the right to free agency. They were given the right to damages in the McNeil case, but what came about was the the Jackson decision. In the Jackson decision, 1994, Reggie Jackson case, players were given a right to free agency, and the NFL was enjoined from doing restrictions by the court system. That paved the way to what's called the Reggie White settlement, which was a settlement of the McNeil case, which amounted to $440 million being paid to the players to settle the case, and in that settlement, the owners got back player restrictions again in the collective bargaining agreement. That was the White decision of 1994. So now we go to the Brady settlement. Many people don't know that Tom Brady was the lead plaintiff for a case in 2011 about the NFLPA collective bargaining agreement relationship and the free agency issue. Brady's case was about a lockout. The NFL posed a lockout on the union and would not let the players cross the line to go to work. That's called a lockout. That is okay in NFL, and that is okay in labor relations to do. So the players were locked out and could not return to work and could not get paid. That was a lockout. Brady sued on behalf of he and 7 other players on behalf of the players, filed a lawsuit attempting to enjoin the NFL from locking out the players so they could return to the field, and they filed a suit about free agency, the right to free agency and unrestricted, and the right to unrestricted contracts in the NFL. That case was also a case where the union was decertified, so Brady could file the case in the court system. In that case, it settled, and the union and management came about a new agreement, 211 collective bargaining agreement, the 211-212 season, that prospered limited restrictions on free agency for the players, and in some cases it could lock them in perpetuity, but it gave the players aggressive pay in the cases where they were locked in perpetuity with what's called a franchise tag, and that I'll go over in a moment. But the Brady settlement was a 211, and that was the advent of the new language in the collective bargaining agreement, Article 9 and Article 10, that covers restricted player movement and the franchise tag, which I'll now get into the current state of free agency. Today in the NFL, the players are free after 4 seasons under Article 9 of the collective bargaining agreement to move to other teams to freely market their services. That's called unrestricted free agency. That is the case in the NFL today, and that's been the case since 2011. They've had it after 4 seasons of playing. It's important I say 4 seasons of playing, not 4 years. So after 4 seasons of playing, they are entitled to free agency. Second, in the current status of the free agency is what's called a franchise tag. In that case, a marquee player can be franchise tagged by the NFL. The NFL can say, I want to keep this player and sign an exclusive 1-year contract with this player under franchise tag conditions. Those conditions are as follows. The player, I'm supposed to smile more, my mom said, so I'm smiling more. The player is paid at the top rate, the median top rate of the players in his like position, or the player is paid 120% of their current contract, whichever is higher. In that case, the NFL team gets an exclusive 1-year contract with the player, even absent a contract under what's called a franchise tag. They can use 1 tag per year, and that is the current status of the NFL. They're at 4 seasons, and then they're free. Otherwise, there's a franchise tag, and that can work in perpetuity. It tends to not work in perpetuity because it's so expensive to utilize a franchise tag. The most it's been twice on Kirk Cousins and on another player that came from Green Bay Packers in the late 2000s. It came up because that rule was in place before the 211. It was just that the rule was edited in the 211 agreement. And in the agreement, in the Brady settlement case, there was money and benefits given to the players. I'm just not sure of what that was. I'm still waiting to get feedback from the Players Association as to what was the monetary benefits that they took to settle the case. So that's the current status of free agency. That's 4 seasons or a franchise tag. This video went over NFL free agency, a concise legal history. It defined free agency, and that is the free movement of players in and out of teams without restrictions of their movement and absent a contract. It went through antitrust. Antitrust is an agreement that no agreement can prevent competition. That's antitrust law. It went over labor law. In labor law, there's a non-statutory labor exemption that exempts the antitrust laws from purview and lets labor law prevail in the case of a collective bargaining agreement by the parties. That's labor law and how it affects the NFL. And then it went to what's free agency today. So you've learned about the Radovich decision. That's the first decision that paved the way for the players to sue in the Supreme Court and the court system antitrust violations. The Mackey decision, that's where the players won. The Powell decision, that's where the players lost. The McNeil decision is where the players won again after decertifying themselves in the Brady settlement. That's where they settled the case for contract provisions of money and benefits, and in exchange there were players' restrictions still in the contract, and they settled the case. Okay, thank you. Have a good day. Bye.